Welcome, my friends, to the ultimate Phase 4 Season of Discovery consumable guide. With Phase 4, everything is set to change, especially which BIS consumables you'll need to maximize your raid performance. If you want to really dominate in the raids and up your power level, if you want infinite mana, if you want to know all about all the new world buffs, keep watching. So I'm sure you know by now that consumables are really the ultimate cheat code to have much higher raid performance. This time around in Phase 4, though, there are a ton of new consumables you should be adding to your shopping list. We're going to be covering the newest buff consumes, the new consumes to max out your damage. And of course, we're going to cover the most optimized buff route to make sure you get all the world buffs as quickly as possible. Let's start with the single most important consume to bring to the raid first. Of course, we're talking about flasks, and in Phase 4, you can actually unlock the recipes from the Tarnished Undermine Real vendor. You can make the flasks in Sholomance, and they last 2 hours and even persist through death as well. More importantly, they're way cheaper than they were before. If you have Potion Mastery and 300 Alchemy, you'll routinely be getting the 3x procs. That means that each flask costs less than 20 gold each to make. Amazing. So there are really 3 major flasks to choose from when you're going to your raid. So, Flask of Titans, very good for tanks. We have Supreme Power, so that's 150 spell power. Really fantastic for casters. And we have Distilled Wisdom, 2,000 mana for your healers, insanely strong. Really, the single most important flask in Phase 4 is Distilled Wisdom. On top of giving you that 2,000 extra max mana, whenever your mana is below 2,000, when you use a Flask of Distilled Wisdom, it'll instantly bump your mana up to 2k. So on Azragos, for example, I use like 5 of these potions. Anytime my mana was low and my mana pots were on CD, Dark Rune on CD, I just popped one of these Flask of Distilled Wisdom and my mana is basically infinite the whole fight. Going into Molten Core, I'm going to have like 100 Distilled Wisdom. They're cheap enough to spam, and they're just insanely strong. On top of the new flasks, we also have a brand new sigil from enchanters that every single raid is going to have. It brings 30 attack power and 30 spell damage and healing to the table for everybody in the raid. So at least one enchanter in your raid, they'd better get revered with Hydraxian Waterlords. And I would definitely recommend doing the Blackrock Eruption dailies for that every single day. For extra motivation, there's also an AoE Fire Resistance Dome trinket from Hydraxian Exalted, so definitely get to work on that. It'll be very overpowered for your raids. So now we're going to cover the very best physical DPS consumes. We're going to immediately follow that up with caster consumes, and we're going to also talk about the optimal world buff route as well. So the new physical DPS buff on the block is Jujus. So you're going to be farming Echoes, and you're going to have to do the Kashimoari quest to be able to pick them up. For strength, you can get the Juju power, or alternatively run the cheaper Elixir of Giants. For attack power, you could run Juju Might, or the cheaper Winterfell Firewater, depending on your budget. Mongoose are also insanely cheap right now, and they're definitely worth using, even for dungeons. And then on top of your potions, of course you want to also have your Roids or your Ground Scorpok Assay. So these come from the Blasted Lands buffs. You gotta bring the right materials to the Blood Mages. And then also don't forget, if you're a physical DPS that uses Sharpening Stones, we now have the Elemental Sharpening Stones in Molten Core. But before that, you'll just be running Dense like before. Talking buff food for physical DPS, Grilled Squid is luckily a lot cheaper than it was in Phase 3. That's because you can get the Winter Squid out of the damage supply crates from the Tarnished Undermine Real vendor. Even better news is that it's way easier to get Blessed Sunfruit now because you can really easily farm the Argent Dawn rep in places like Stratholme. If you're playing a warrior, for example, not only are you going to do more damage with the Sunfruit, but you're also going to be saving a ton of money as well. So at this point, you're probably getting a little bit overwhelmed with all the different consumes. That is where the Taladriel spreadsheet below the video comes in handy. The thing about this sheet, it does have things like ZG consumes, so if something's not available, you'll know why. So moving into Caster DPS, the really good news is that we have a brand new Wizard Oil. If you've been doing your Blackrock Eruption dailies, you'll be able to pick up the recipe from Lactose and the Grim Guzzler, and it ups your spell power from the Lesser Wizard Oil of 16 all the way up to 24. As for damage amp consumes, we have the Greater Arcane Elixir, and you can stack that with Elixir of Shadow Power, Elixir of Frost Power, depending on which kind of damage you do. Now if you do fire damage, you'll be really excited to hear that the Elixir of Greater Firepower is available. We were stuck with the normal Elixir of Firepower for so long, so this is really welcome news. Now, casters will also want to be grabbing the Cerebral Cortex compound, so that gives you an extra 25 intellect from the Blasted Lance buffs, and that does stack with everything else. As for food, Nightfin Soup is going to still be a really popular option for mana regen. Personally though, I really prefer the extra intellect, the extra crit, from the Rum Tum Tuber Surprise. The recipe comes from Dire Maul, and it's going to be way more popular with casters because they really want to have that int. Also talking Dire Maul, the Krieg Stout beatdown is 25 spirit, but you lose 5 intellect, so you have to decide if that's worth it to you. One last insanely strong consume for casters is the newly buffed Stratholme Water. It is tradable, and depending on prices, it might actually be cheaper than a Talai Mojo. Exact same amount of mana regen, so definitely keep an eye on prices. So there's really no point using these fancy consumes if you're just going to be dying over and over again all night. That's why we've really got to take care to stock up on defensive consumes as well. Tanks, of course, are going to want the Elixir of Greater Defense, Gift of Arthas, the Flask of Titans, even the Lung Juice Cocktail from Blasted Lands. But every single raider should take advantage of Elixir of Fortitude, even the Rumsey Rum Black Label for free health. Tryhards can even use the Juju Ember for extra fire resistance and MC. More importantly though, anybody with a thick wallet, they can bring all sorts of protection potions to really help their survivability chances. When we killed Kazakh, for example, every single player in the raid, they had a greater shatter protection potion pre-popped. Then when we killed Azurgos, every single person in the raid had a greater frost protection potion pre-popped. Of course, Molten Core is going to be so much easier if everybody has greater fire protection potions rolling. And don't forget, there are definitely some uses for greater arcane protection potion as well. Just because we're prepared in terms of buff consumes, we really shouldn't be sleeping on activatable consumes. If you pull aggro and Molten Core, every single raider should be ready to use Lip at a moment's notice. Meanwhile, I'll definitely be bringing a stack of Masterwork target dummies, because they can easily prevent a wipe and really prevent some frustration. Savvy raiders always also have the major healing potions, even the Whipperroot tubers ready to go. Meanwhile, if you're a mana user, your options for staying topped in terms of mana have really gone up. We've got the major mana pots, the demonic runes, the dark runes. So with all of our consumes completely sorted, we've got to talk about world buffs. Songflower, Ani buff, Rend buff, Darkmoon Fair, and Dire Maul as well. So the optimal order to grab these buffs, I would definitely start with Darkmoon Fair. I think Darkmoon Fair is just the most annoying by far, especially if it's on the opposite faction. Then I would recommend taking advantage of the Nova World buff timers. To get yourself a Songflower, I like to get it out of the way early. At this point, I'll either get a summon or fly over to Feralis, and I'll try to get a hunter selling Dire Maul buffs. Then I like to finish off with Rend and Ani and Orgrimmar. The thing is, you really want to have that Chrono Boon ready to unboon and boon over and over again, so you don't want to be doing all this last minute. There is one buff you're 100% going to want to have in Molten Core, and that comes from Upper Blackrock Spire. So if you mind control a Spellbinder in Upper Blackrock Spire, you can get an 83 fire resistance buff. Having this entire buff on your raid for Molten Core is going to make the raid so much easier. Whether it's those new flasks, whether it's the new buffs, the consumes, the food, there are so many things you can do to have a way higher chance of success in your raid. So let's get out there, let's get full buffs and full consumes, and really take our gameplay to the next level. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to check out the document below the video so you can recap all the consumes you'll need. And of course, subscribe for upcoming videos, way more guides soon. Then click on my gold making video right now to get tons of gold in time for the raids.